It's 1998, Mount Everest. At 28,000 feet, a woman lies on the slope. She's still alive, barely able to move, barely aware of where she is. And the only thing she whispers to the people standing beside her is,
"Help. Don't leave me."
But a few hours later, they leave her anyway. Because if they stay, they die too. They weren't just climbers. They were Francys and Sergey Arsentiev, a married couple bound together by one obsession: the mountains. Francys was born in Honolulu in 1958. Restless, stubborn, full of energy, she had been drawn to the mountains for most of her life. By the time she met Sergey, climbing was no longer just a passion. It had become the center of who she was. She had already been married before. She had a son, Paul, and like everyone close to her, he knew the mountains always called her back. Sergey was born that same year in the Soviet Union. By the late 1980s, he was already considered one of the strongest high-altitude climbers in his circle. He had spent years building a reputation in the mountains, taking on difficult ascents and earning deep respect from other climbers. When Francys and Sergey met in the Himalayas in 1991, they connected almost immediately. Both understood one thing better than most people ever would. Life down below never felt quite as real as life in the mountains. Together, they climbed all over the world, and eventually, they set their sights on Everest. But not just Everest. Francys wanted to do something almost unthinkable: to climb the mountain without supplemental oxygen. It was one of the most dangerous choices a climber could make, and even inside the family, not everyone was at peace with it. At one point, Francys spoke to her son Paul about the expedition, and he asked her not to go. Not to attempt a mountain without oxygen. But by then, Francys had already made up her mind. They weren't just climbers, they were partners, a rope team, bound by trust and by the mountains themselves. Their goal wasn't just Everest. They wanted to climb it without oxygen. At that altitude, your body is literally dying. Every breath feels like breathing through a straw. Your brain slows down. Your judgment fades. In May 1998, they began their expedition from the north side of Everest, from Tibet. On May 17th, they made their first attempt. They climbed up to 7,770 meters, but had to turn back. On May 19th, they climbed higher, reaching over 8,200 meters. This is already the death zone. Sergey radioed down that they were fine and planned to begin their summit push at 1 a.m. But the next day, everything starts going wrong. On May 20th, they begin their summit push, but in the freezing cold, their headlamps fail. And on Everest, climbing in the dark without light is a death sentence. So they are forced to turn back again. They return to Camp 6, above 8,000 meters. They stay there for 3 days. 3 days in the death zone. Weather conditions don't allow them to descend, and every hour at that altitude is destroying their bodies. On May 22nd, after days in the death zone, they make their final attempt. Francys is exhausted, barely moving, but she keeps going. On May 23rd that evening, they reach the summit. They had already spent 3 days in the death zone. Francys was severely exhausted, and she was developing frostbite. The cold, the altitude, and the fatigue made the descent extremely difficult. But on Everest, the descent is where most people die. They're stuck at 28,000 feet. No proper shelter. Night falls. By morning, they are separated. At that altitude, it doesn't take much. Visibility drops. Your mind slows down. And even simple decisions become difficult. Most likely, Sergey believed Francys was right behind him, or lost sight of her in the storm. Sergey searches for her. Francys is found higher up, barely conscious. Climbers try to help her. They give oxygen, they try to move her, but very quickly they realize they can't save her. At that altitude, above 8,000 meters, even standing still takes enormous effort. Dragging or carrying another person is almost impossible. There isn't enough oxygen. Your body is already shutting down. And if they stay too long, they risk dying there with her. Expeditions like this also take years of preparation and enormous financial cost. Turning back is never an easy decision. But in that moment, it becomes the only possible one. So they leave. Meanwhile, Sergey turns around and goes back up, alone, after days in the death zone. He knows what this means, but he goes anyway. The next day, Francys is found again, still alive. She can't move, barely speaks. What's almost impossible to comprehend is that she had already spent days in the death zone, at extreme altitude, without oxygen. Most climbers wouldn't survive that. Somehow, likely because of her conditioning, her experience, and sheer will to live, she was still holding on. One of the climbers who came across her during the ascent later recalled, "She looked so much like me. It was terrifying. I couldn't understand how no one had helped her. We thought she was dead. Then she moved. Her skin looked like porcelain. She looked at us and whispered, 'Help.' She begged them not to leave, but they had no choice." Sergey was never seen alive again. His body was found a year later, identified by his bright suit. He likely died trying to reach her. Francys remained on the mountain, preserved by the cold. For years, she became a silent marker on Everest. Climbers began to refer to her as the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. Years later, climbers returned, moved her body, covered her with a flag, and left a letter from her son. This isn't just a story about Everest. It's about choice, about love, and about the price of a dream.